Hi everyone! As you can see from my beautiful background and my dog very much tugging on his leash, it has snowed out here and it's very awesome and wonderful. So, I know you can hear the dogs barking in the background, but I just wanted to let you know that today I'm finally going to be wrapping up reads for Indigathon in November and nonfiction November and additional fictional reads that I read for November. So this video is only going to cover fictional reads that I read for November, and yeah, so I'm really excited about it. It's kind of cold out here. So okay, I'm going to go out my doggy and I shall see y'all soon. Look at him. Spark, Spark. Spark! Sparky! Come here! Come here, Sparky! Hello everyone, so Kim here with Native Lady Book Warrior, and I bet you all are saying Native Lady who? Sorry, it's been a while since I've been gone. There's just been so much going on, and I think one of the things that I have to share with you all is I recently got a new job. So that is one thing that I have been trying to settle myself in, and I am definitely a lot more busy, and my time, it's went from this to this. But that's okay. I mean, I love where I'm at right now and I'm enjoying it. And it's been a pretty awesome journey so far. Yes, I am very busy. But I will let you know right now that I have a whole slew of wrap-up videos that are going to be coming out pretty soon. Basically wrap-up videos from November, December, January, and then just recently February reads that I completed. And I'm really excited about them. And I kind of already have in mind what I want to do for each one, especially for November. For November, I read a lot of books, so I want to split these videos up. So this video that, of course, you are watching right now is my November fictional reads that I read for 2021. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, so one of the first books that I read for the month of December, and it took me a while. I actually got a review copy of this book from Milkweed. So thank you so much, Milkweed, for providing me this book. And it is called The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. Diane Wilson is Lakota, and I think she is from the Sichanghu Lakota community. It took me some time to get absorbed in it because the writing, in my opinion, did a lot more telling than it did showing. I kind of had to sit a little bit more with what was going on. But the longer I sat with it, the more I became absorbed by the plot and the characters. And this multi-generational Indigenous fiction. And I want to say, I think it spans briefly across 2 to 3 generations, but it's definitely not told in chronological order. Some of the characters kind of like make this very brief appearance, and others you're kind of going back and forth between two Indigenous characters within the same generation, and they are friends. This book was one that I could relate to, and it even reinforced some teachings and beliefs in my own Indigenous community when it came to land stewardship and spiritual and cultural beliefs that we have in terms of connecting ourselves to land, and how we fortify ourselves and even our cultures close to land, especially when it comes to my community, when it comes to planting. I also found the significance of family connections within this book and the importance of intergenerational learning, intergenerational parenting, and how we heal from trauma and how we heal our communities in terms of family and also connections, not just family, but found family, and how I found that to be a central theme in this book. So the book crafts a story of a family and a nation's, specifically an Indigenous nation's extensive connection to trauma, and that connection of trauma to land theft, and then to genocide, and then to Indigenous community removal. This book, it narrates 3 Indigenous perspectives, and they're all Indigenous women, and how each of these characters are surviving in their own time, how they are dealing with challenges such as racism, also environmental injustices that are happening at the time, not only with Indigenous communities, but the local community at that time that are engaged in a lot of farming practices and businesses. What I found with this book is also there is a definite layering of an interconnectedness with environmental and systemic racism that is happening at this time. And it's interesting because in this book, it ranges from a very quiet, covert act and behavior to something very loud and detrimental. One thing that I took away from this book is that injustice and oppression in any form is very much life, culture, and land destroying, especially within the United States. The non-linear timeline that was within this book is what kept me most engaged. For me, that interruption and pacing and plot shift and character shift actually kept me most engaged with this story. I think the only thing I wish I got from this book was more of an ancestral perspective that makes its way in here. I wish I got a little bit more of that. I think what I want to do is ask the author if that was intentional. The ancestral perspective that came in, I feel like it came in at times where I feel like the other characters either needed strength, or maybe there was something that was missing within their own lives that they didn't have, but this other perspective did. I feel like that gave it a more powerful, heartbreaking, and added layer and complexity within this book, and it really pushed that forward for me. I gave this book four stars because the beginning was a little bit slow, but once I got into it, especially the relationship between the mother and son and or mother and child, I feel like those relationships were really important and kept me engaged in this book. So yeah, the next book that I read for Indigathon, I may have not sorry, but I was just about to get all excited and get into this book, then someone's car alarm went off. This next book, I really have, like the first time I read it, I really had to sit with it. And I had to go back to it. And I just had to really reflect on a lot what was being said in this book. And that is Indian Mechanisms, Notes from the Field by Billy Ray Belcourt. Holy crap. I think the reread of this was just as powerful, just as incredible as the first time I read it. So Billy Ray Belcourt is, in my opinion, is a freaking genius. Like whatever he writes, I feel like it's just gonna get better and better and better. So Belcourt is an Indigenous queer author from the Driftpile Cree Nation, and this book at times has been hard for me to absorb, simply because I feel like I'm not very, almost like intelligent enough to absorb everything in this book, and especially to digest all of this Indigenous brilliance that is just swimming and reeling through this book, and it just hits you, and then all of a sudden you're just flowing with these passages, and then something extraordinary is said within 1 or 2 lines, and you just sit there and you're like, what the heck was I just reading? Or that's how I feel when I read this book. The way Belcourt uses his beautiful talent with words and history, experiences, settler colonialism to build emotion and sensation. And then of course, when something gets built in I felt like sometimes it would just crash back down with some very reflective moment or something that is just beyond what a pain that I can never feel. I have serious tears splashed on these pages, and my reading experience with this book and with Belcourt it's deep and it's very profound. But this book also contains humor and an incredible thought and a display of celebrating body, Indigenous body and minds, and its connection and its also roots within indigeneity. Belcourt's voice is very sharp yet incredibly liberating, to a point where this body of work demands to be reread over and over. One experience that I have with this book is that it very delicately holds your mind and your heart in its hands, and it's just almost asking you not to look away. This is definitely a read y'all have to check out. Incredible. I think anything by Billy Ray Belcourt, in my opinion, is a 5-star read. I don't know how you even review something like, or how I even review something like this, because I feel like it's just so powerful and amazing. So yes, second read I started in November. Go read it. Okay, so the third book that I read for the month of November was definitely a read that surprised the hell out of me. I hybrid read this book, so I read it both. Well, I started out reading it with the physical, and I think I got like maybe 50 pages in, and then I think I had to drive somewhere. I was going somewhere, and I wanted to continue my journey with this book, so I ended up downloading the audiobook. And wow, it was incredible. I think, so the author of this next book is Brandon Hobson. Brandon Hobson is from the Cherokee Nation, and the book I'm talking about is The Removed. So initially, I actually attempted to read one of his, I don't know if I have it back here, I probably do, one of his other books called, what was it called? Where the Dead Sit Talking. So I tried to start that book, and I tried to start that book by audiobook, and I wasn't really enjoying the narrator. So I put that down. I decided not to read it, and instead I picked this one up. And the other book, Where the Dead Sit Talking, was actually a recommended read from Etu Brody, or Bear, and whose channel is Etu Brody. And I was like, you know what? I feel like maybe I'll read this next, but I definitely felt like I needed a shift. So I picked this one up, and wow, I was absolutely surprised. And I just feel, but yeah, let me just tell you what this book is about. So this book starts out pretty immediate with the unjust death of a young Native boy. And that death actually happened by the hands of a police officer. That death occurs very suddenly and very wrongly, of course, in the beginning of this book. And then the result of that death is perspectives that are written chapter by chapter. So you're switching perspectives each chapter. And it is the family of this young boy. There is a mom and a dad, there's a brother, and there is a sister. And it goes through those perspectives, and it shifts. And it just basically looks at the impacts of that death. It looks at the impacts of trauma and grief and loss. Wow. I guess one of the things that I really wanted to say was that if you all can have a chance to get your hands on an audiobook, wow. Gary Farmer. So Gary Farmer, I didn't even know he narrated books, but I mean, Gary Farmer, I know Gary Farmer as this Native actor. So you all may have seen him on Reservoir Dogs, but his narration, and another perspective that's in here that is Gary Farmer's voice is the ancestral perspective. So, and it was really good. It was very powerful. I feel like in some of those, and that perspective, his voice was so powerful and haunting to a point where I was getting chills or I was getting very, very emotional to the point where I was wanting to cry, not in terms of sadness or disappointment or hurt or pain, but cry in a way of agreement and happiness and hope. I mean, I did cry in terms of being sad, but within this book is like, it felt very medicinal. I mean, it starts off almost historical, and then it kind of transitions into almost this voice that is guiding and giving hope to this family, but also talking about what has happened to the Cherokee people and the trauma, then the historical trauma and the injustices that they have gone through. Once I finished this book, I thought about it for a while. It was kind of like one of those books that stayed with me and I kept thinking about after its conclusion. Oh, it was getting dark, so I had to turn the light on. Sorry, but I think one of the things that this book effectively does is it interlaces grief and pain, trauma, and all its melancholy and injustice alongside themes of resilience and wonder and hope and storytelling in a way that had me aching in here. Some of the perspectives, it's kind of jarring because you know what, I'm not going to tell you why, but it's basically one of the characters is suffering through addiction, and his perspective, you can't, it feels like a very unreliable narrator. I think that perspective is just another symptom and an impact of trauma and grief. So I felt like that was very on point in my opinion. The different points of view, like I was stating before, some of them rattled me, had me feeling like these characters and the plot is almost disjointed. But I feel like that is very intentional, because when we talk about trauma and pain and grief, there's nothing that connects those things. And in terms like trauma can actually disconnect you from the outside world, from others, from even yourself. This book had me diving into sometimes my own ancestral trauma and things that my community have gone through, because I feel like, and we have to kind of understand where our traumas are rooted at, and then kind of connect those to intergenerational and then to individual traumas. I found myself actually reflecting on that just because of reading this book. I think also this book's conclusion, I'm not going to spoil it for you all, but it was just so darn good. It was beautiful. I cried and I cried after I finished this, and it's just a wonderful work of grief and the things we do to fight like hell with the help of family and hope to survive those things. So thank you very much, Brandon Hobson. This is an amazing book, and also thank you very much, Bear or Itu Brody, for this recommendation. This is probably one of my most surprising reads that I've read in 2021, so thanks. This was awesome. Well, this next book that I read is actually a middle grade read. Yeah, I actually read a middle grade book. It is definitely an Indigenous joy read, and that book is Healer of the Water Monster by Brian Young. This book was good. It was really, 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 really good. This book makes me want to explore more middle grade BIPOC cultural and fantasy titles, so I'm so thankful. Neil Yazzie, who is an Indigenous bookstagrammer, actually sent me this book, so thank you so much, Neil. This book is incredible. I realize now that I didn't want to call this book a fantasy book, because this book is definitely a oral tradition, cultural storytelling read, and I don't want to call it magical realism either, because a lot of what happens in this book is very much originate within Navajo culture, Navajo storytelling. So it's sort of like a Indigenous cultural / history read, part myth, part adventure. So it's just, this book is just so many things. But Brian Young is an Indigenous author. He is Diane or Navajo, and this story starts out with a young Navajo boy named Nathan Todechini. His parents are no longer together. I believe they're separated or they're divorced, one of the two. So Nathan, he decides that instead of going to either dad's or his mom's for the summer, that he actually wants to spend time with his grandma or his Nali or his paternal grandmother for the summer on the Navajo res. So his plan is actually to experiment with heirloom seed planting versus like commercial corn seeds. And he has this whole science experiment laid out, and that's what he tells his mom and dad, his excuse for kind of getting away from his home life to go explore and just hang out with his grandma for the summer. But very early on in the story, he comes into contact with these holy beings. He follows them and kind of gets into a little bit of mischief and trouble on the way. But then later on, he finds a holy being that actually needs his help. So he goes on to this Navajo storytelling adventure that has come to life. And it was so good. There's so much joy and humor, and it's full of imagery. The setting, how it's described, I could just see it perfectly in my brain because that is basically where I live. I could see and hear all of the characters. I could picture them with someone that I possibly know. There's this one scene, like I was mentioning earlier in this book, that is just so funny, and it made me want to give it 5 stars just for that scene. But I don't want to spoil it. I'm not going to let you guys know. It is just a scene that it was just so relevant to me growing up in the area where I'm at, especially with both my mom and dad's side of the family not growing up with running water. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about this was there is Navajo language in this book. So there, every now and then I would bug my husband and ask him to pronounce certain things because he is fluent in Navajo. So I rated this book 5 stars. Such an amazing book. Definitely go check this book out. It's a pretty awesome read. And yep. I don't remember what number am I in. I'm not even counting. But anyway, this next book that I read was incredible. So that book is called, I don't have it with me. I actually e-read this book and audio read it. But that book is called Islands of Decolonial Love, Stories and Songs, and I'll put it right here. So this was actually my first time reading Leann Betasamosake Simpson. Simpson is a Michitsagig Nishnabeg artist. I don't know, I'm probably butchering that, but I think one of the really awesome things about this audiobook, if you guys decide to pick it up, is that it is narrated by Tantu Cardinal. Holy crap, do y'all know who Tantu Cardinal is? But yes, it is so amazingly good. I had such an amazing experience with the narrator and it being read. And this book is also the February book for Indigenous Reading Circle. So if y'all don't know about Indigenous Reading Circle, it is facilitated by 2 amazing Indigenous bookstagrammers and book reviewers, which is Erin's Library and Danny from Thunderbird Women Reads. 2 amazing Indigenous reviewers. I suggest y'all follow them. But when I began reading this book, I have felt, honestly, I felt a little bit exposed and vulnerable. I felt like some of the works that were written and some of the songs that were in this book were almost putting parts of my life on display. But it is so amazing. The writings on love, and it's very thin line of fear, but also I felt like some of these stories very much stopped me in my intellectual tracks and my journey with this book. And I whispered to myself, holy crap, like this. I felt like sometimes as I was reading this book and I looked around, like almost as if someone was watching me or that I was on display, or as if me reading it and engaging it in it on a emotional and psychological level, that it was like as if it was me admitting my thoughts to a lot of it. I guess I want to say me just reading this and my experience with it, I felt seen almost. And it felt like my heart finally connected with another heart and a human being that understands it, I guess. And it was almost like singing a song together, but a song of understanding and a song of vulnerability and a song of celebration in that commonality within this book. And the format that it's written in, the format that it's expressed in, there's a lot of back and forth between the physical, the emotional, the mythical, the spiritual, and almost like that internal dialogue as well. So I really enjoyed that. I felt that was such an incredible thing to have experienced. And on top of that, that going back and forth, or that interweaving of into this world and another world, or just into ourselves, that it's also packed with a lot of emotion and feelings, stories that will make you nod in agreement or be surprised with what not really like surprised like what the heck, but surprised and touched in a way like, wow, thank you, I feel seen, you know. Definitely go read it, go buy it, go get it, because this is such an amazing work of art. And I think no matter what Leann writes, I think I'm gonna end up getting it. So yes, a definitely 5-star read here. It's completely incredible. In terms of land acknowledgement, I actually read 2 Navajo Diné authors. And the other book that I read by a Diné author was a poetry book. And this book is written by Indigenous or Diné author Jake Skeets. And this book was a reread for me. And so I just want to say thank you so much. Firstly, to Milkweed, they sent me a review copy of this book. And again, I just want to say this is an incredible work of poetry, work of art. And this book is called Eyes Bottle Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers by Diné author Jake Skeets. This was such an incredible reread. I also kind of started this at the beginning of November, but I kind of had to sit with a few things or sit with what I read, and then I came back to it. I think because I really wanted to read this book with someone else. So I actually contacted a friend of mine, and they said that they had this. So we actually out loud read this book to each other over the phone, and it was so incredible. The author is from a region that I can connect to and that I can see. So one thing about Skeets, in terms of me experiencing this book and reading it, was that he definitely knows how to connect the opposite ends of an emotional spectrum. So whether if that's brutality and love and beauty, or love and hate, I don't know. It was just something that I found reading this book that made me basically jerk from one way to another way, but done in a linguistic fashion that made my brain almost split in half. It was such a thing to behold and such an incredible experience that I had. And I feel like this book, it's sharp. It has a sharp edge to it. And it also is able to wrap Navajo culture, beauty, and identity along with Indigenous queerness. And I was so fortunate to come upon this voice and to reread and re-experience again. Definitely check this out. Jake Skeets wonderfully delivers a heartbreak like no one else. And it's incredible in all its gorgeousness. It is a very beautiful, emotionally layered book that definitely challenged my brain and the way I emotionally feel things. This is an incredible read. Go check it out. Again, I think this is the second time I'm talking about this book, but yeah, such an amazing read. This next book I read, I was trying to get the ebook on this next book and I just couldn't. I think there was a lot of people that had this book on reserve. This book was another surprising, incredible gift that was laid upon me and on my feet by none other than Bear or booktube channel Itu Brody. So thank you so much, Bear. This book was incredible. It is incredible. And it is a book that definitely surprised me, and I was so fortunate to read this book. This book, I'll put it right here, is called Nature Poem. And this book is written by Indigenous queer author Tommy Pico. Tommy Pico is a citizen of I think it's called the Kumeyaay Nation. So I listened to this via audiobook, but when I was looking at, I think it was just like a sample of this book because I couldn't check it out through ebook, but when I looked at it, it's written in a really cool format. It's almost written as a series of poems via text, and it's even written like how a text would be sent. I think another thing that I really enjoyed about this book is it is actually narrated by the author themselves, and I was just like, what? So listening to it, it is definitely a fast-paced read. I think even if you put this book on one, like you're still gonna get through it pretty quick. So the pacing of it is definitely fast. This book, I want to say, is so beautifully and unapologetically indigenously queer. It is so full of humor. It is full of storytelling brilliance, and there were times where this book did slow down in terms of pacing, but I think that is because the tone that the author wanted to accomplish was definitely something that you're just like, whoa, and it just like whoosh, slaps you across the face, and it was pretty incredible. This book also takes a look at indigeneity, culture, and identity in a very unromanticized, unapologetic way. It throws Indigenous stereotypes and racism back in your face without any hesitation. And I feel like those kinds of books are so incredible. And it even, like, in my opinion, if you've ever had a thought like that, it definitely calls you out on it. Even it calls out even not just non-Indigenous people, but Indigenous, and in my opinion, sometimes Indigenous people themselves. That it was just amazing. It was so awesome. Tommy definitely gives us a view and the heart and the mind of an Indigenous person that is still Indigenous, even if they exist within the urban setting and isn't like engaged in a ceremony like every single second or engaged in Indigenous spirituality or mindset like every minute of the day. This is very important work, especially when it comes to violence and stereotypes and racist attitudes that definitely dehumanizes us. So I feel like this is an incredible piece of work on that end. It accomplishes so much on that end, and I thought it was incredible. This book is an easy 5-star rating, and I very much enjoyed it, and I'm so thankful to you, Bear, for putting this book in my hands and making this recommendation. I just want to say, if you guys are kind of like on the fence of whether or not you want to listen to this, I just want to say, if you enjoy powerfully narrated audiobooks that sing and celebrate Indigenous queerness and Indigenous contemporary life and challenges in all its rawness and honesty, especially within this book, I suggest y'all definitely go get this book and listen in or just give it a read. So yeah, it is definitely a book that is probably, or it has made one of my top reads for 2021. So go check it out. Okay, so the next book that I read for November that was a fictional read, I actually read a companion piece to Tommy Pico's nature poem, and I'll put it up here again. And that book is called IRL. Yeah, like IRL. So, and I actually listened to the audiobook for this one as well. It was really good. I also was blown away that this was also sort of written like a text message. I enjoyed this one. I mean, the poem specifically The setting takes place in during summertime, I believe, and it radically and has this fast-paced movement to it, and it kind of flows back and forth between facts and experiences of an Indigenous person experiencing settler colonization and colonialism alongside queer urban Indigenous life in Brooklyn. So I think one of this book is sort of cool. It goes over love and dating and obsessions, and and a life that simply never comes with instructions. The pacing, like Nature Poem, was definitely a rush, but I also felt like the pacing was such in a rush where I had to actually go back and rewind and re-listen to what I just heard. There would be a sudden change or shift in the poetry, and I'd be like, what's going on? What I saw in this piece of work and what I experienced is something I unfortunately hadn't had the pleasure of experiencing before. And that was poetry that could definitely gut punch you, but it can also be incredibly sexy, funny, with a double, triple dose of raw chaos. I rated this book 4.5 stars. Alongside these two books, IRL and Nature Poem, Tommy Pico actually wrote two more companion reads. I don't believe you have to read them in order as far as I know, but those other two books are Junk, which was written in 2018, and then Feed, which was written the following year in 2019. Yeah, so but I definitely want to read those two books. So far I haven't been able to find them, unfortunately. I hope I don't have to order them at a large bookstore, but I want to find those books, and as soon as I do, I'm going to read and tell y'all about them. So yes, definitely go check out Tommy Pico, a amazing Indigenous queer poet and writer. Amazing. My time with these books were definitely incredible. Go check it out. So the next book I'm going to be talking to you about, I think it's either the 9th or the 10th book I finished, fictional book that I finished in November. Gosh, this book. So I read so many incredible books in the month of November, and this book, I read it through audiobook, and it's called This Town Sleeps. It is an Indigenous fictional read. It is written by an Indigenous Ojibwe queer author named Dennis E. Staples. Dennis E. Staples is from the Red Lake Nation, I believe. And this book, it follows an Indigenous gay man, and that man's name is Marion. He lives on or near the Ojibwe reservation, and during this book, he becomes involved in an affair with a former high school classmate. But that plot alone by itself comes with all kinds of challenges and complexity, and I won't share what that complexity, for those of you who don't like to read the back of that leaf or get spoiled by it, I'll let you discover that for yourselves if you want to read this book. I enjoyed reading about that relationship dynamic and seeing where it would go, only because I really enjoyed Marion's thoughts. I feel like his thoughts, and he himself he's such an incredible, wonderful, kind, just positive character. Like, I really wanted to see that character go somewhere. But this book started out strong for me, and then it takes a very interesting turn. Marion sees this ghost dog, and it's a ghost dog that leads him to, I believe, this cemetery, and then it goes into this mystery like subplot, or in my opinion, almost like a double plot, where Marion is figuring out what happened to a Native athlete that was murdered years before, and his death is one of those deaths that has strongly affected the community. and that still kind of like lingers in the back of the community's minds and hearts. Yeah, it was really interesting. I was like, wait, where is this leading to? Okay, so let me just split it up right now. So the positives about this book. I liked reading about the culture, the family history, the connections between characters, and of course the humor. The native humor I felt was pretty authentic in certain parts of the story. But, okay, now I'm going to switch over to this column. Okay, things about this book that threw me off. First is the plot. I felt like there was like two plots happening in this story, and not only was it cutting the book in half, but I felt like it was cutting the characters in half too. So I was like, what am I experiencing? Am I not getting this? Am I not absorbing this book like how it should be absorbed? So I had a problem with this book. So I was like, what is the author trying to accomplish? So I think instead of me thinking like how I do when I read a book, like what is the author trying to say here? I should have just read it. But then when I did, I was kind of like, I would have to rewind a chapter because I would be lost a little bit. And then there's also perspectives that come into this story that provide a little bit of something in terms of character development and plot, but not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot that was added there. Okay, one thing I love about books is that I love multiple narrators. I love multiple perspectives. One of my favorite books that I read in 2021 is They're There by Tommy Orange. And that book had like more than 10 narrators. And a lot of those narrators were pretty brief. Sometimes they'd even get to speak more than like several times. And I felt like with the book They're There, I didn't get lost with the narrators. I knew exactly who they were, how they connected to one another. But this book, I did get lost. I kind of like, okay, who is this character? How are they connected to other people or perspectives or plot lines within this story? So I got lost. I don't know if it was because I read the audio book and I wasn't taking notes or whatever, but sometimes I had a little bit of difficulty connecting these characters to one another and also connecting the characters to the plot. Like, because since there was some things going on with each of the characters, I was like, okay, now what's happening? Which plot is this connected to? So I feel like the author was, in my opinion, I feel like the author was trying to accomplish a lot within this one book. And unfortunately, like I stated before, I didn't read the physical book on this one. So I wanted to ask you all, if you had read this book, is there a family tree? Or is there a cast of characters? I just want to know. If just leave it down in the comments and let me know. So maybe this is a book that I definitely need to read the physical one on and maybe revisit and come back to. But at this point, I wanted to love this book. It had such an interesting premise to it. I feel like Marian's own challenges kind of took a backseat to what was going on with these other characters. And then even with that, even with the beginning of this plot with Marian having this affair with this former high school classmate, even at the end of that story, I was kind of like, I'm not really enjoying this plot now. And even though that's the plot I first started out liking, I just want to say, I think this is probably my top disappointing read of 2021. I really wanted to love this one. I wanted to love this book before I started chapter 1. And in the beginning, I was enjoying it. I was enjoying this book, but unfortunately, by the book's conclusion, I just felt disappointed. But this is a debut book. The writing, I didn't have any problems with the writing. It was beautiful. So I look forward to anything Dennis Staples writes in the future. And I hope I do see something new from this author. Maybe I just need to reread it and revisit this book again. But this is just one of those books that I really wanted to love. That sometimes books that we really had high expectations for, but then coming out at its conclusion, I just felt like it fell flat for me. So, yep. So that book is This Town Sleeps by Dennis E. Staples. Okay. So the next book, I reread another Indigenous poetry for November. And that book, I don't have it with me. I actually loaned it out to my brother-in-law, so he's reading it. He really wanted to read it because they came to visit my brother-in-law, my mommy-in-law, my daddy-in-law. They came over to have breakfast, and he was looking through my books, and he was like, "Oh, can I read this?" So I gave him a couple of books from my shelf, and he took those with him. But that book is Disintegrate, Dissociate by Ariel Twist. Ariel Twist is a two-spirit Indigenous queer author. Such a beautiful and heartbreaking piece of work. I don't even know how to explain how beautiful this book is. I mean, how do you explain a book that decolonizes and re-indigenizes body sovereignty and spirit, and I mean just humanity overall? I warn you though, the way this book explores violence, pain, and abuse is not gentle. And whenever I read this book, I come away emotionally exhausted and just needing time to not even read. I just kind of need time to kind of recover. I'm also very honored to read those experiences, and something that is so powerful and incredible. One thing that I always talk about when I'm reading, and especially poetry, is that I'm not a poetry reader. I feel like I'm not giving this book a proper review. And if you're looking for a little bit more diversity in your reading, BIPOC queer reads, or simply poetry that explores honesty, displacement, and violence, and does not flinch or pull back, I suggest y'all read this. But there is a lot of beauty in this book too as well. But I just want to put that out there, along with Eyes Bottle Dark too, that does explore violence. Yeah, two incredible books. Well, I talked about the other book already, but Disintegrate and Dissociate is definitely one of those books that I was like, whoa. It is a hard rocking book, and I encourage you all to read it. Okay, so the next book that I read for November, I read a romance, people. Yeah, like who is this reading romance? But I read the second book for an Indigenous romance series called Crooked Braves, I believe. And this book is number 2. So that book is called Lovesick Braves. Okay, so this book, Sweetheart Braves, or no, that's another book. I'm getting all these books mixed up. But so this second book is called Lovesick Braves. I read this for that Indigenous Joy prompt. And it is written by Pamela Sanderson. So Pamela Sanderson is a citizen of the Karuk tribe. And I just want to say that, okay, so first let me tell you what this book is about first. So this romance focuses on specifically, well, mainly 2 Indigenous characters, Esther Parker and Theo Dunn. Yes. And their busy lives and beyond romance, and how it not only complicates their feelings towards one another, but also their very, very stressful paycheck to paycheck lifestyle within an urban community. I think both of these characters, or I think one of them, has like multiple places of employment, and the other one, I believe, is trying to do, or they're both, I think they're both in school and trying to maintain multiple jobs and put on events, and it just sounds so stressful. It sounds like college. They're not only does it deal with challenges within them having to survive within the city, pay rent, etc., but also their experiences with racism and the challenges that the Indigenous communities face, and their kind of like their reaction and their place in all of that. And this book also is able to not only demonstrate the challenges that Indigenous communities face within urban settings, but also the strengths and the awesomeness. So I really enjoyed that about this book. But this book also just doesn't cover Theo and Esther. There's multiple staff at Crooked Rock Urban Indian Center. So it does interweave the lives of other staff within this book. And another one that I'm very invested in is Arnie and Linda. I think that's their name. I think one of them is the executive director of the urban Indian urban organization, and the other one is on the board, I believe. But yeah, they've been at it since, like, back and forth, and all kinds of interesting romance subplot since the first book. So I feel like not only am I invested in those other characters, but I'm also invested in the happenings and the struggle and the continued striving of this urban Indian center. So that's what I love about this book too. I rated this book 3 stars. And I'm just thinking, am I not a romance reader? What is going on with me? So one of the things about this book that I enjoyed more, which is unfortunate, is the subplots and the other minor characters. I actually wasn't invested in the 2 main romance characters, which was Theo and Esther. And to me, I felt like their characters weren't developed enough, which is interesting because it does talk about Esther in the first book. And that disappointed me because I really enjoyed, and I thought I knew Esther from the first book. I was like, oh, I want to go back. So I went back to the first book to make sure this is the same character that I was hoping would be the next book. And it was. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to read about Esther. I thought she was really, in the first book, I thought she was really funny and endearing and just really cool. I was hoping to see more of that in the second book. But to an extent, I did enjoy her, but not as much as I hoped, which is unfortunate. And I actually had to go back and make sure that I didn't mix her up. I was like, wait a minute, is this the same character that I thought was going to be in here? So I went back and I went to make sure that I didn't reread it. And I was like, yes, this is the same character. Yeah, so I was kind of like, bummer. But what kept me really engaged within this book is just the background plots. That is one thing that I was invested in. And of course, the other characters, Arnie and Linda, I think that's their names. But another thing that I really enjoyed about this book is the Indigenous humor between Native characters, and that banter that happens between, especially within the workplace with people that you've worked with so long. I feel like that was pretty on point. Yeah, and there was something that happened within one of the sex scenes that I was just like, for real, she said that. I'm not going to tell you all what it was. I'm pretty sure if you go into Goodreads and you read several reviews, you'll find out. But I was just like, man, yeah. I'm just so on the edge to seeing what's going to happen within this urban Indian center, urban Native center. So I'm kind of excited for that. And just seeing where it's going to go for the center and all the really awesome work that these characters engage in, and just what they're doing for the community, especially what happens and how Native people kind of lean on one another in times of need. So I thought that was pretty cool also. So because of that, even though I did give this book 3 stars, I'm going to be continuing it because I really want to find out what happens with the other characters, read up on the other romance, and then also what happens with the native urban center. So I'm kind of interested, and I just kind of want to see where it goes. The only thing though is I am trying to find this next book, and I cannot find it. I don't want to buy it on Amazon. So if you all are savvy with some book apps out there, I haven't even checked if this book is on Scribd or Scribed. I'm looking for this book on my Libby right now. So far, I've checked one library. They don't have it. So it's going to be fun looking for the next book, which is book 3. And that one is called Sweetheart Braves. So that's why I was like, is the book called Sweetheart Braves? No, it's not. It's called Lovesick Braves. So I can't wait to read the next book, and I shall tell you all when I read it, when I get to it. So I think one of the things that I'm quickly finding out is, one, I don't know a lot about the romance genre. I don't know like the tropes. That's one thing that I'm learning. And then also one thing that I'm kind of digging more into is just more BIPOC romance authors. So I'm kind of like developing a list right now. So that's going to be a fun project maybe I should do for like June or something, and like label those videos summer love. Yeah, that does sound like an idea, right? Okay. All right, moving on. The next book that I read for the month of November is a fictional read, but I didn't read it for Indigathon. I actually was given a free copy of this book by Libro FM, so thank you, Libro FM, for giving me a free copy of this audiobook. And that book is called Sankofa. Sankofa is written by a Nigerian author, and her name is Chibundu Onuzu. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but sorry, I'll put the book right here. So I listened to this audiobook on, of course, like I said before, it was provided by Libro FM. And this fiction follows a character named Anna Bain. So Anna Bain is a biracial Black woman who is half Welsh and Bonaman. Bonaman is actually a fictional, it's a fictional country. It's so funny. So when I was reading this book, there's some pretty cool plot stuff that happens at the very beginning of this book, when you're discovering and digging more into this character's past, specifically her parents. There's this fictional country that the father is from, which is called Bamana. So I don't know where the author got their inspiration from, like what other country this could possibly be. At the start of the book, Anna is recently separated from her husband. Her daughter is in college, and unfortunately her mother at the very beginning has just recently passed away. Anna kind of reflects on her life and comments back and forth, especially on memories of racism that she experienced while living in London, and the prejudice that she experienced living in London. And during that time, she is going through her deceased mother's things. And during that time, while going through her mother's things, she discovers a journal, and it is her father's journal. And that journal is dated in the 1960s. So later on, Anna discovers that her father's name is Francis Agray, and he's an African scholar who came to London to study and was part of a group that engaged in a lot of politics and anti-colonial protesting. And then all of a sudden, I don't even know if I should tell you, or if you don't want to know this next part, you can go ahead and skip ahead to the next book, or the next book description. But then suddenly, but this is also written on the leaflet, but if you don't want to know this part, you can go ahead and skip ahead. But then Anna discovers that, because she starts asking around about this person and who he possibly is, where he's from, the plot reveals that Anna's dad became the first president of a newly independent country called Bamana, which, like I said before, is a fictional country in Africa. And then Anna goes on to follow that information that she's given, and she decides and makes decisions in her life of discovering who her father is and wanting to get to know him and wanting to discover basically where she's from. What I enjoyed about the book was Anna's exploration into her self-discovery, and basically her literal self-discovery journey to find her father and to find out where she's from. I think another thing that I enjoyed about Anna was Anna's choice to make that decision of self-discovery to achieve a sense of wholeness, because during this time, Anna, and I feel like sometimes if you read this character, if you don't enjoy reading characters that aren't the hero, that aren't like, in a sense, because she's gone through some devastating points in her life, so the prose isn't actually cheery, or it's not it's not like, whoa, like this adventure or thriller aspect. It's just basically her, this divorced woman who recently lost her mom, who's about to be divorced, or maybe she is already divorced, I can't remember. But then she starts digging into her past and remembering and reflecting on things, and kind of you get like a prose that is dealing with self-discovery and dealing with issues of abandonment and identity. And of course, sometimes the pacing of this book isn't very fast. But I think what I liked was coming into those plots where some things are funny and they're not like, oh, like out loud funny, but I think just the circumstances that she finds herself in. And then another thing that I really enjoyed about this book and what I enjoyed reading about, which is kind of interesting, is unraveling that mystery of her father and finding out who he is, the layers of his complexity and where he's from. And it's really interesting because he's not even the main character. And I feel like it's almost like an unraveling. The more she finds out about him, it's not a sense of finding out who she is, but possibly finding out bits and pieces of what she possibly missed out on. So I feel like that is a big thing that I enjoyed about this book. So I feel like the tone of this book it shifts a lot. It's really weird. It's not consistent with the tone. I feel like there's a shift in the feel of this book. And it goes from, of course, Anna, who it's kind of like this brooding, foreboding tone, and then it shifts to someone who is earnest to find out where they're from, and then to humorous, and then all of a sudden to urgent, because there's things that happen later in the book that you're just like, what's going on? And then finally ending on well, I don't want to tell you, but just ending on a different note. One of the things that I thought about this book is that I didn't enjoy the protagonist, but I felt like that is very intentional. In my opinion, I felt like the author accomplished something there, because this character grew up not knowing who she was, and grew up in a country where if you stick out, especially if you're probably the only Black person in a community that is filled with white people, that you're first, especially if you don't have a parent there and a Black parent there telling you this is who you are, this is your identity, then you're going to assimilate and you're going to be colonized into a society that doesn't accept you, that is prejudiced and that is racist. So I feel like it was very intentional, and the author definitely, in my opinion, accomplished that with this character. And I think that was kind of like the point of this story, because it's interesting. In the beginning of the book, I started out not liking this character a whole lot, but at the end of the book, I had different feelings and opinions on it. So I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed it. I'm still struggling with the rating right now, but I feel at this point, I would give it like a 3.75 stars, or I think, you know what? I'm just going to give it a 4 stars, because at the end of this book, I was like, wow, that's a pretty good book. I wasn't mad at the conclusion. The writing is good. I enjoyed the writing. I think one of the things that I just had issues with was just the shift in the tone, I guess. So it wasn't gradual. Sometimes it was a bit rough, but other than that, it was a good book. Where am I at now? Okay, I am about to share with you all probably not only my favorite read of Indigathon, of November, but this is probably my top read of 2021. And that is The Yield by Tara June Winch. I'm going to tell you right now, easy 5-star read. Y'all need to go pick this up. I mean, if you don't want me to spoil what this book is about, why I enjoyed it, just go check it out. But this book is by Wiradjuri author Tara June Winch that follows 3 perspectives. I would have given this book even just a 5 stars if this book was only one of those perspectives, which is an ancestral perspective. So that one of the perspectives of this book, or one of the characters, is named August Gondawindi, and the other is an elder, Albert Gondawindi, which is the perspective I love the most, and a white missionary named Reverend Greenleaf. Is it Greenleaf? Yeah, I think his name's Reverend Greenleaf, but he's some kind of missionary priest person. This book takes place in Nungarambang. I'm butchering that name, but it is the native word for Australia in the Gondowindi language. And so this book starts out with August flying home. She is traveling from London to attend her grandfather's funeral. And she just has all this guilt from being away from her home for so long. But before Albert passes, he is actually writing a dictionary in his language, in their language. And the way he is collecting that language is not like a dictionary. It is in some ways, but it's also a storytelling, amazing historical account of his life and his people. But I don't want to spoil it, but it's incredible. That format and that POV was my favorite, and it is powerful. So this book takes place within a region on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River at a place called Prosperous House. Like I was saying before, this book shifts perspectives between Albert, the grandfather, the granddaughter, August, and then the Reverend. And it all takes place near or close to this home that they call Prosperous House. So August's perspective is told on a current timeline, while and that timeline is also exists where she is giving like these bursts and recollections of very powerful and sometimes painful memories. And during that time, she is discovering that there is a mining company that has come to that land, and it's buying up land so it could start this whole industrial process of making tin. The company comes to this town, starts buying up all kinds of property. Everyone is moving out. The third perspective is told by Reverend Greenleaf, who is a missionary, and this is on a completely different timeline of before Albert, definitely. And that Reverend is telling their experiences through letter writing and possibly even historical journal accounts, where Greenleaf opens up Prosperous Lutheran Mission for Native inhabitants. Yep. So beware. That perspective has much attitudes of white saviorism, but there's also a very brutal, violent account of atrocities, injustice, violence, and even massacres that he writes of during that perspective. Hence, kind of, it's obvious that area where Prosperous House is at, which transitions from that mission, is called Massacre Plains. So this book, oh my goodness, the writing in this book is incredible, and it successfully captures emotion, history, language, Indigenous families, hardships, challenges, loyalty, and love, and historical Indigenous history and strength in a way that I have never read before. That format is definitely gained from those two Indigenous perspectives of Albert and August. I feel like this book is a love song to Indigenous language, experience, land, familial rooted bonds that is strengthened by ancestors and ancestry and also culture. Wow, I feel like I'm not successfully describing this book, but also I feel like what is captured within the dictionary, the creation of the dictionary, is that the description of place is much more than a bunch of adjectives. It's very much rooted in emotion, and even it's dripping with heart. And lastly, this deep connection that this family has to land and to life. Go read this book. I'd say, like, out of all these books that I've talked about so far, if I were to just pick one that I recommend you all read, it would be this one. So I think this is one of those books that I felt is a must read. I think also any lit fic junkie would enjoy this book. I gotta say that the language dictionary is very on spot with Indigenous culture and language. With Indigenous languages, or just language overall, you have to string a whole bunch of words together to just describe one little thing. Or you can have one word meaning not just describing a thing, but describing an action, describing what's in here and how we demonstrate and how we show it, but not definitely what it is described to be, if I'm making any sense. Language is definitely something that is rooted in what must be felt, seen, experiences, and even at times defined description, because you have to be there to understand what it exactly means by seeing it, or by smelling it, or by seeing it in action, or by that behavior, you know. So I feel like this book was complex in so many beautiful different ways. I feel blessed to have read this book. And one of the people who probably encouraged me to read this book during Indigathon, specifically the month of November, was Sean. And he said that he was rereading this for Indigathon for 2021. And I was like, you know what? I have that book. I just need to just get on it and read it. So thank you so much, Sean. I mean, I've had this for a while. I also received this book from one of my subscribers, so thank you so much for sending this book to me. I appreciate it. But yeah, that is me ending my video for fictional reads that I read for the month of November. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Sorry, it is a little late for me to be reviewing November books this late, but I hope you all got something out of it, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day or your evening. And I hope you all reading fiercely, and I hope you are all safe and well. So I shall talk to you later, and I'll see you soon. Bye.